brought up in New York City. My father was a physician, and his father was a physician, and his father was a physician. And it was a lively household, and my particular most important influence was my grandfather, actually, who was an organizer for the Socialist Party and who introduced me to left-wing politics very early on.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was really a wonderful way to grow up.
So would you say, what about that influenced you later in life?
Oh, the whole cause for social justice permeated my life. I mean, I can remember going down to the docks to see off the Abraham Lincoln Brigade when they sailed for the Spanish Civil War to support the democratic cause there. I mean, I worked in the settlement houses in Harlem, teaching little boys and girls how to read and write when I was 11 years old. I started doing that on Saturdays.
How did that happen? Was somebody, an adult in your household, was starting a program or doing this kind of thing?
No, I heard about it and I went.
As an 11-year-old?
Mm-hmm.
So
got on the subway and went up to Harlem.
My goodness.
It was really, it was an exciting way to grow up. It really was. And so it continued, you know, for all my life, and that's how and why I am interested in Primer, because it is a major social justice issue.
So how did you first get started in the world of research ethics?
An absolute fluke.
Oh, my goodness.
I was divorced after 30 years of marriage, and I had to get a job. And my ex-husband had been a member of the faculty at the University of Texas in Houston, so I knew a lot of people. The chair of neurology called me up one night about 10 o'clock at night and said, "Paula, I hear you're looking for a job." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "I need a secretary for the IRB." And I said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. Zero." He said, "Well, come talk to me. I think it'll be a good fit." And that was in 1976. And it's been a good fit.
So you started off as a personal secretary?
No, secretary to the IRB. I ran the IRB.
Secretary to the IRB.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you expect when you were going into that?
I had no idea. My ex-husband had been a researcher, so I was very familiar with the world of research. And I knew how to talk to clinicians because I had been amongst them all my life. So, you know, I wasn't scared of them. I just was scared whether I could work after 30 years of not working, bringing up children and, you know, being a housewife.
Did they give you a particular kind of training to do this job?
No, this was 1976,
Right.
Gigi. You know, IRBs were just starting.
There wasn't any training that they could give you?
No, you know, we just learned on the job.
So what was it like there? Was there any emphasis at all on protecting
Oh, there was
subjects?
more emphasis on ethics and protection than there is now.
Really?
Nowadays, it's all compliance. It's institutional-driven compliance. In fact, it's a very disturbing trend.
So tell me how you've seen that unfold over the years.
Well, before we ever had any regulations at all, we had to work very hard to figure out what the ethical principles were and how they applied. Then we got the Belmont Principles, which was the best thing in the world. We all steeped ourselves in the understanding. And I used to teach a lot about, well, I still do, the principles. And then we got the regulations, and it became over time, not right away, but it became over time sort of a checklist of how you go about reviewing a protocol. And I think accreditation has only made it that much worse. Mm-hmm. And then the various things that happened in Washington that drove every academic institution I know has a compliance officer now that breathes down the necks of the IRBs. It's changed.
You sound disappointed.
Oh, of course I am. We had a tremendous, great trajectory, of ethics and principles and learning together and caring about it. And the idea that if you didn't document it, it didn't happen, it's just crazy. I mean, it only means that you didn't document it. Doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
This makes me so sad.
Yeah, well, it makes me very sad too, because I'm at the end of my career and I didn't want it to end this way.
Was there a particular turning point where you
Sure,
felt
there was.
What was that?
When Gary Ellis started closing down IRBs and the Jesse Gelsinger case all helped make institutions terrified that they too will encounter this kind of problem. And so compliance became the name of the game.
How did this compliance manifest itself? It's not just the consent forms, it's behind the scenes.
Consent form doesn't mean anything. I don't even like consent forms. They're not the real issue. The process is what's really important. But liability issues worry the institution, the academic institution. The lawyers start looking at what you're doing. They hire compliance people who read over all of your manual of operations and your SOPs and stand guard over you. People, when they're compliance driven, are paying attention to the regulations in a way that was never intended. The regulations were written to be flexible, and they're interpreted as fixed. You get this conflict between the research aim and the institution's need to protect itself. So where we used to think firstly about protecting human subjects, and lastly about protecting the institution, the third issue is creeping up more and more.
My goodness. So go back to when the Belmont Report was written in
1979.
You indicate there was some excitement.
Oh, there was indeed. Well, we knew that the commission was proceeding. I attended a number of the sessions. They were wonderful and exciting. Some of the best minds in the country were involved in thinking through. There is an 8-page précis, a summary of the Belmont Report, and I ask our IRB members to reread that at least once a year.
It is a beautiful document.
It is a beautiful document.
I think it's poetry.
It is. It's not written in federalese. It is just elegant, and that reminds you what we're really doing, or supposed to be really doing.
So are you the only person that you know that
Oh, no, of
senses
course not.
this?
Oh, no. Most of us that have been around a long time are very well aware, and people you will be talking to for this series, I hope, will articulate the same thing because they feel it.
So it's the old guard that's disappointed?
Yes, I think so.
And the new generation
don't really know what we all went through. They don't know the excitement and the challenges that we had. Now it's just a cut and paste operation, I mean, it's a checklist. And while I think checklists are good, they are not the be all and end all. It might work fine in an operating room when you're setting up to have a checklist to see that every particular valve is open or closed as appropriately, or the pilot on the airplane goes through a checklist of getting ready. But a checklist for IRB review of protocols is just not the way to go about it. I think the consent process is the only thing that's meaningful. A piece of paper means nothing. The piece of paper, which used to be a single piece of paper, can now be 19 pages, 24 pages I've seen. And, we are obfuscating what things are about, and people are overwhelmed by the amount of material. So that's not the way to go. And I hope someone can be very creative someday and use current media or computers or comic book setups to help people understand what the research is all about. But nothing takes the place of one-on-one talking about it, giving people time to process the information and ask questions. In the paper that really set everything off in July of 1966, a professor from Harvard wrote a really fabulous article. And the last line or so of it, in which he talks about respect for persons without those exact words, the single most protective for subjects in research is an honest, responsible, intelligent investigator. So I think we've put everything at the wrong end of things. We have to educate in medical schools. We have to educate constantly about research as a privilege to do and must be done by responsible people. Someone who cannot do research, cannot embark on a research project unless they are skilled, knowledgeable, imaginative, and really people-directed.
So what advice would you give to a potential subject who is going to sit down with a researcher and try to decide if they're going to be part of a clinical trial?
Well, you want to know, what does that participant really want out of being a subject? It seems to me there are lots of reasons why people who are approached, we've got a clinical trial, we think you might be an appropriate subject, would you like to talk about it? Is it that the person has the disease and thinks that this research is going to benefit them, which is rarely the case? The person has an aunt who has the disease and thinks, yes, this is my duty to other people like my aunt. I never discount altruism. I think it's a potent force for people to be involved in research. And then I think there are people who know that the only way science and healthcare is ever going to progress is through research. And who, if not me? It is, in a sense, our obligation to everyone to participate, to make healthcare better. That's what it's all about. So then, if you know why the person, and there is no therapeutic misconception, then you sit down with the investigator and they tell you why they think the study is worth doing, what the background for it is, why you fit for the inclusion criteria, and what it's going to mean. Now, in our case, you might have to come back to the Texas Medical Center, which is enormous, easy to get lost, expensive to park in, and you might well say, oh, hell, I don't want to do that. Come back 6 times. Oh, that's just going to take up half of my day, and I don't need to do that. Or you say, I think it's a wonderful idea and any inconvenience to me is worth it.
Tell me what you've noticed over the years about the role of a community member on an IRB.
I'm very fond of our community members. I think they're the grounding people. They're the ones who say, hey, I don't understand that. Tell me that again so that I understand it, because if I can understand it, then people in my community, the larger community, my specific community will understand it. So it's a way of bringing people back to the basic, that it's really human beings that are going to be involved who don't understand our jargon. They don't understand science by and large. They may have a smattering of information. They are just ordinary folk. They need to understand. And we can get very esoteric in our discussions, and the community members will frequently say, hey, hold it, I don't understand. And then they help us to understand. They also tell us how do people feel about coming back to the medical center 7 times in 2 weeks' time? What can we do, to make it? We have other clinics out in the community. Why can't the follow-up visits be done in the community, the clinics that are located close to where I live or close to where I go to work, so that my inconvenience is cut down? And you guys should be able to arrange that.
What kind of training do you think is important for a community member?
Oh, I talk to them a lot.
Yeah?
Do a big orientation. Always have. And for many years, we had every 3 months, quarterly, we would have a lunch and a speaker for all the community members in the Texas Medical Center. And they would come together and we'd do a little 20-minute talk about one thing or another that was going on, bring them up to date about what kinds of research was being done. We have, 2 medical schools, 3 nursing schools, a school of public health, 13 hospitals. There's a lot of research going on in the Texas Medical Center. And all of the IRBs have community people on them. So we would have 20 to 40 people at a lunch and, talk to them. They would say what kind of problems they encountered. We had one institution where the only piece of the protocol that the community member got was the consent form.
What do you think about that?
I think it's outrageous.
Why? Why?
Why? Because you have to understand the whole thing, not just the consent. And it diminishes their role to sort of like, look at the grammar, look at it, is it simple enough? Well, I don't even like the piece of paper. I'd like to dispense with the piece of paper. It's the process that's important. I love the buddy system. I think it's great. For the first 3 months, the first 6 meetings that they go to, they should have a buddy that they sit next to that they can call afterwards and say, I don't understand why we decided that way, or what did it mean when they said that? I was embarrassed to ask, but I can ask you. I think there's a backlash against all of this compliance. I think we need to get back to, the 3 ethical principles that Belmont talks about. The one that we never talk about is the justice principle. To me, that's the most important. We are now in an era when research is being done everywhere in the world. The fact that we can do research in countries that have no research infrastructure is very bothersome. We do research in villages without potable water. We do research in villages without electricity, without people who understand what PK studies are, who know how to take blood pressure at the right time every other day or every day or 4 times a day. It's a very different scene. And I don't care whether it's Africa or Asia or the old Soviet Union countries. I can tell you that the infrastructure is lacking. We need to work on that because I think the research is suspect when it's done that way.
Is there a moment when you were particularly proud of a decision that your IRB or your institution
made?
Yes,
absolutely. We were in the forefront of emergency exception to informed consent. I have written about it, talked about it, worked on it. We were able to get it done. We do it, I think, the best. It's what we call the Houston model.
Describe that for me.
Community consultation. We go to, the IRB decides approximately how many places a research group who wants to do a study where consent will not be given, cannot be given under emergency circumstances. And we go 14, 16 places. We've looked, we were pretty haphazard in the beginning, but now we're pretty organized about where we go to talk. Different community groups. We always include the chaplains. The chaplains at the medical center have a monthly meeting, and we always present to them because they're one of the first people that interact with the families of the patients that are involved in these studies. It's always invariably trauma patients, severely ill, terribly dramatic circumstances. And the research has to be done, because we will never learn how to treat these patients if we don't.
Right.
And so we worked very hard from 1995 until the present to get the rule fixed. We were the first institution in the country that was given permission to do this.
Wow.
Before the rule came out.
And then what about for you personally? Was there ever a small or private triumph, or just something that you felt like you took a stand for personally that you ended up influencing how the issue resolved?
Oh, I like to think that everything I've done has had impact. I really do, because I'm the curmudgeon. I'm the one that always says, we have not considered whatever. One of my particular axes to grind is women in research, pregnant women in research. How are we ever going to learn the interaction of drugs that pregnant women do take, because they also have comorbidities and I don't think of pregnancy as a morbidity, but they do have hypertension, they have epilepsy, they have a lot of things that they are taking medication for. How will we ever learn what the effect is on them or the fetus if we don't include them in research?
So how do you describe what you do to your grandchildren? Do they know?
Yeah, well, Emily worked for Primer.
Okay.
She very much knows.
All right.
Well, they're all pretty much scientists and epidemiologists, and they like what I do, and they think it's important work, and I think it's important work, and they've been very proud of me, and I'm proud of the work I've done.
So let's talk a little bit about your involvement with Primer.
Oh my goodness, that goes back a very long way.
Were you one of the first members?
We weren't members then.
Mm-hmm.
My first Primer conference was in 1978. And I think in 1979, I met Joan across the registration table. And she and I just clicked instantly. And we became friends. And I got to know people in Primer, and I came on the board in 1981 or 82. I think I just left after 27 years on the board, which was a marvelous experience in my life.
You have seen the growth from the beginning.
I have.
So how has the role of Primer changed from the early days?
Well, in the early days, it was a mom and pop operation, and Joan is extraordinary, as we all know, and able to entice people to come and talk with very little effort. She's just remarkable that way. So we had from the beginning, whatever movers and shakers there were in the world of research ethics, all the people involved in the creation of the Belmont Report, one by one would show up at Primer meetings on invitation from Joan. And meeting people who have these ideas and able to implement them and able to write about them and talk about them eloquently is an inspiration. And you want to carry on with that work. And so you come back home and you say, well, I went to the Primer conference and I heard Lou Lasagna say whatever, or Bob Levine say, and we need to begin thinking about this. And then we would organize a retreat for our IRB and talk about them in depth.
What do you think the man on the street needs to know about research?
Well, that's why I did all the outreach for so many years, just to let people know what research is and why it matters in their life. And not talking to them about being in a particular study, not talking about my institution is a great research institution, but talking about what research means to them. You know, it touches our lives everywhere. Just think about the vaccine programs. I mean, it's just everybody needs to know that research is the only progress we make in medicine and science.
I have a theory that by the time somebody is sick and sitting in a room with a research team,
it's
too late.
It's too late.
So how do we get this general education? How do we manage that?
Look, we go into classrooms.
Right.
We go into grade schools and we talk about it. We go into high schools and we talk about it. We go into colleges and we talk about it. I go to fraternities. I mean, I go anywhere. Church groups and talk about it.
Whose responsibility is it to create these education programs?
It's an inherent responsibility in all of us involved, whether everybody does it or not. I don't know. I think we just do it.
Right.
And we have, if the institution supports you and lets you do it on the time that you're working, if they think that outreach is important and that there's some payoff for the institution somewhere along the line, they'll give you the time during the day when your working hours. If not, you do it in the evening. And most groups assemble in the evening anyway, so I have eaten rubber chicken at more, lunches and dinners for community groups, nonprofits. It's just, I think it's a responsibility we have to do that.
What would you hope that humanity as a whole would understand about research as we move forward in these really exciting times?
Well, I hope they don't think that genetics is a fortune teller's, glass ball that they're going to look into and say, oh, you're going to die on April 5th, 1935, or, and you're going to die of, because people have the craziest idea about what genetics is going to do. So we have to do some teaching about that, what the expectation for the Genome Project, for genetics in general. That's a big misnomer. There is no crystal ball that's going to tell you the day you're going to die or what you're going to die of. So that's one very important thing that we have to disabuse the public of. But we have to make people understand, that we are responsible for each other. And we have to do things to help each other. And one of the ways we do that is to understand about research and, when appropriate, volunteer to be in research studies.
What do you think is the most dangerous thing ahead of us with regards to research and protection of subjects?
I think it's become very bureaucratic. I think we've stopped thinking about the ethical principles. And I think we have to get back to that. I think we have to make IRBs less rigid, more flexible. I think we have halted a lot of science in the name of, there is always an inherent conflict between the need to progress and the need to protect. And we have to do better about the progression, because I think we've stymied a lot of science.